not doing local.
Yeah.
Oh, hey there. Whoops. It's Michael J. Cohen, Arkangel, Wulf design and illustration, right?
That's me. That is me.
That's a cool last name that you legally changed to up there in Canada. How's it going, Michael?
It's good. It's good. I'm noticing. I'm gonna zoom my camera out a little bit. I'm a little close in here, but otherwise I'm good.
Sick.
Yeah. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. You know, still revolving around Earth, making decisions or feeling that I'm making them. Who knows what brains really do. But yeah, we're very excited. You know, you and I were talking earlier today, looking at progress on a few fronts. And despite tariffs and some lingering questions there, although we're pretty sure we're going to stick with our beloved Chinese printer and sort that out. Despite that, we are very excited to be sending out PDFs soon because the book is done. The miniatures are going to come along really quickly, and even our bonus material. So, you know, certainly folks will have their Nostalgitronic beautiful, beautiful books, just not in physical form for another few months. But yeah, no, today, what do we got brewing, Michael? What's left to do?
So there's actually not that much left in the book. There's a handful of illustrations still left to do. It's like odds and ends, but I saved this one because this is probably the most involved one that I've got left. And it's our two henchmen, our Bebop and Rocksteady stand-ins, Disco and Heavy. And there's a section out of the 8 play sets. There's one that you are the most likely to encounter them in. And that is because it's where their little home base is. It's where they like to hang out and make a mess and basically be teenagers. Even though they're not, these are canonically in the story fully grown men that decided to be transformed into mutant monsters on behalf of a crazy snake.
Yes, they did. Yeah, they switched sides from neoliberalism basically to fascism, which is, this is not a happy story in a way, although it looks very happy and you can beat them up and steal their stuff. But it is kind of a comment, deep story. But the way it looks is great because you draw on it is this sort of cutesy 1988 Saturday morning cartoon and isometric. Hey, Taylor. Hey, Vex. Glad to have y'all in the chat.
Yeah, so I've had this one in my head for a really long time, and getting this one out is going to be good. It's going to be fun, I think. But I cheated a little bit. I've started ahead of time, and gotten the ball rolling here, just to save a little bit of time on the stream. But yeah, so we've got our Ankylosaurus Heavy and our polar bear Disco, and their bone snake castle bedroom where they are being slovenly and obnoxious. So yeah, I've only roughed these out though, so like these are very rough, and I'm actually going to what's the quickest way for me to do this? Let's turn on my reference. Do I have a folder for these guys? I think I have a Stillfleet folder. Are they in it? That's the real question. Old reference only. Okay. That's going to be a pain in the butt to bring up, so I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to try and redo these guys from memory. It's funny because even though I have created the look and design of these characters, there's a large component of it that's like, what? Okay, exactly. How do I do that? How did I draw that thing? That aspect of it, but and consistency is just. It's one of those things, but
we talked about that a little, I think, with Ubun, when you were designing the official final Ubun, for the cereal box, and then kind of thinking through the helmet and all the exact like the angle. But how
Yeah.
do you keep track? Is it if I were to do this because I'm a writer, I would probably write it down. But do you just like force yourself to commit to memory? Like, okay, when I draw this made up guy or gal or
Yeah.
you know, whatever, they're you know, the bend of that last plate on the back of the Ankylosaurus, you know, mutant back should be at such and such degrees. Like, you know, how much do you care? I don't know if there's anything you can say either in Vice or just like your way of doing it.
Yeah, I think I give myself a little bit of leeway, and that is I have to remind myself that most people aren't paying as much attention as I am. I just shortcutted this. I opened up Heavy and screenshotted them so that I can just open them up as reference. But it's. So because we're doing the 1980s 90s cartoon thing, we get a little bit of a pass that these guys don't actually need to be 100% on model all the time, because those shows were never 100% on model all the time. So if he's a little bit, so you can see even in the sketch here, I had done the horns in the wrong proportion. They're actually flopped, and that was one of the things where I was looking at this and going like, this isn't right. That's because I need a bigger horn up here on the top and a smaller one on the bottom. So it's little stuff like that,
right?
That it's what's most important is that the iconography of the characters are consistent, and that the silhouette is consistent. So I think for the most part, the silhouette that I've got here for like you know, his body proportions of his arms and legs and everything, and the size of his head is all good.
But you also did answer the question, which is you find a reference image. So you have like one main image, I'm guessing, right, for each of these guys, and you go back to that. That's kind of the main way to tell if you're on model.
Basically, it's kind of the best way to do it, is to just have I mean, if it was gonna be, if we're doing something more complicated or I was involving more people in the process and it wasn't just me, you would want to do an actual like turnaround of the character, which is to draw them from the front, the side, you know, like a 3/4 angle from the back, and all of that sort of thing. Especially if you're going to do animation, you really need to do that stuff, because you never know what position you're going to need to put a character in. And then you'd have like an expression sheet of like all of the different ways that they emote and that sort of thing, because different characters are going to have different rules. Like Heavy here is one that if you were doing an expression sheet, so far I have only drawn him with the single expression, which is this you know, very Ninja Turtle-esque grimace of you know, menace. But his eyes don't do anything, right? So how would you convey emotions with him if his eyes are these like RoboCop cybernetic eyes that I've given him? So that would be a thing that if we were doing something where it was required that you know, these characters do a little bit more, I'd have to go in and I'd have to create that stuff as the character designer, as the guy responsible for the look and feel of all this stuff. I was going to do him in his gold color, but that's not going to show up very well. So let's switch back. Let's go to a nicer purple. But because it's really just me at the end of the day, it's not that big of a deal. And the consistency doesn't have to be like 100% all of the time. Again, as long as the silhouette is there, and that's the one part, like, so for the head, I don't have it correct. The silhouette is not correct because I had the horn shapes inverted there.
Those dastardly horn shapes. Is this pretty typical, Michael, would you say, in terms of when you think about characters and do iterations of them, in terms of the number of times you have to make adjustments, like, oh, the horns, or like, remember again with Ubun's helmet, there was something about exactly how much it looks like a Kabuto, and you know, is that sort of typical that you know, you basically get it right, there's like 90% right, and there's this 10% that you have to kind of double check? Just in terms of, again, your process, I'm sure everyone does it differently, but I feel like this must be how some other illustrators at least do it.
Yeah, I think so. I think like I'm sort of alluding to it. It all depends on what the purpose is, right? And that's more of a design thing than it is an actual like specifically an illustration thing. But it's something that I think I bring over from my graphic design background, which is at the end of the day, it's about what the purpose of the piece of art is for. And for this one, because like the purpose here is this will be a small illustration on a larger page, and it's really not the focus. It's an inset illustration. So if this were like the one that we were working on previously, which I will here, let's just pop out for those who've been here for the whole journey and want to see the finished illustration from previous streams. This one is like this is a full page, right? Like this is a full page within the book. So as a full page, it's got to be it has to hit a certain level, and so there's a lot more detail in here, and I'm worried about certain things. Like there's more detail in this illustration of Ubin than there is on his character page because we're closer up on him, and it's a little bit more. There's a little bit more going on in it. So, but with this one, this is just going to be like a little inset on the playset page for Bone Snake Castle. So it's really not going to be that big on the page. Like it'll be a few inches wide at the end of the day. So I don't need it to be like perfect. I just need it to read properly.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So when I'm considering that part of it, it's like like we can get away with a little bit, and I cheat in some places, but you also want to minimize that because you want to maintain the integrity of it, right? But
yeah, unless you didn't. But I think to your point, it's kind of like, I mean, to again zoom back out or refresh the viewer. It's like, what are you going for? So in our case, we're going for more consistency than I would say is normal in an indie RPG. Also, just more recurring same character than is normal.
Yeah.
Usually you're getting types. Type of dude 1, type of little green dude, type of huge guy, type of that thing, type of ooze. But here we're getting like a few of the same characters recurring across a book to give that comic booky sense. Even though it's not a comic book, it's a game manual, but it's giving that vibe, that cartoon comic book vibe of kind of heroes and villains mixing it up. Right. So I think that's interesting in and of itself. And yeah, it's really fascinating. It's a little different than we typically kind of think of the arc of illustrations across a book. And I totally get it now after having watched you do all of the design work. Because I remember when we first talked about it, in my mind, it was much more, we'll do like one illustration of this person. But I see from your point of view, you really wanted to kind of pull that through. So again, it's very fun. It's fun for me, at least, if no one else, it's fun to see it come to life.
Yeah. I think that we did a little bit more world building in this one than I like specific world building, not just like the like location, setting sort of stuff, but like actually creating a cast of characters within this scenario so that you can get familiar with them and that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. Because when I think of world building, I'm thinking about worlds to then essentially mess with from a GMing perspective. And I think here we're not talking about the same world building. I'm thinking of like scale of a planet, a biogeosphere, and really much more than that, the scale of the political. There's groups of people, they want different things, there's different resources. What would be fun for players to stumble upon or not know about? What are some random things, right? Just random encounters that define a world. Like, I think there's sort of a general OSR, NSR like belief that, you could write probably like 10 things in a numbered list, and that defines a setting pretty well, right? Or even 6, whatever. Whereas I think when you're talking about world building, you're thinking about like visual style, or correct me if I'm wrong, something like visual style for collection of characters who share a story. Something like that. I don't know. You want to elaborate on sort of your version of this kind of through line, this visual and narrative through line?
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, when it comes back to the Saturday morning cartoon aspect of it, right? Like we're we're building out like a tone for it, and I think like the best way to get that tone across has been through our characters. That they're obviously the most expressive way to do it, right? Like I think the playset illustrations that I've done are really cool, and they give a good vibe as well, and like a good sense of the place. And I think that that'll be really fun for GMs and players to play with. But to me, it's really like when you see the characters, like that to me is the thing that I think people have connected with the most, as I've done some comic shows and stuff like that, and I've put this stuff out there. They think the Nostalgitron, like the big sort of like Death Star Technodrome thing, is cool, but they really zero in on characters, and it's really funny to watch them zero in on certain characters, on specific characters, right? Because I've got a print that which is kind of a very Star Wars-esque poster of all of the character illustrations that I put out on my table. And so it's got all of our heroes and then Ubin in the background, and all sorts of people will, like, they'll home in on the one that speaks to them the most, and then they'll start asking me questions about it, and we'll start talking about, you know, like, oh, that one's kind of our Leonardo leader type, and that sort of thing. And then like it's such a great in to the world. So I think most of the time in RPG books, your world building is through these like incredible landscapes and beautiful paintings and that sort of thing. That's not what I do. I have stretched myself on this project. There are some actual like setting backgrounds and obviously the play sets and stuff, but I don't usually do backgrounds, but I don't think that they're like the centerpiece of the book, right? Like I think that the characters are really the centerpiece of the book, and that they really get you into the idea of what the Nostalgitron is more than anything. So I think it's a slightly different approach, but a lot of the books that I've really liked, they have that approach. It's a funny thing because the D20 game from Wizards of the Coast for Star Wars back in the early 2000s, around like the prequel era. This is just after the Phantom Menace. It has a bunch of characters in it. Like there's a character for each class, like under each class page, and those are actual characters. Like those characters have a backstory, and like there's like a whole mythology to them that only exists inside the books. And if you collected all of the books from that era of the role-playing game, then you could sort of follow them along, and like as Attack of the Clones came out and the Clone Wars happened, some of them like were embroiled in that, and there was evolution to it and stuff. And so it's like I think about that, and that sort of a way of telling a story, because in Star Wars you really don't have to do a lot of this is the world, everybody kind of already knows it. So they focused in on the characters.
But that's you know, Dragonlance, right? I mean, that's, you know, D&D was doing it not, you know, before Star Wars in the sense of the movies, but before, you know, Star Wars games became as popular as they have. And I think that approach is a little weird because most players really like making their own characters. So it's kind of a shoot the moon gambit. You know, it's like you don't get to make your own characters in a sense. But I also think it's something we've looked at more. And like with this story, because it was meant to be pre-gens and a quick start, I mean, it makes total sense, right? And which is why you sort of pitched it that way. Is it's not just an adventure, it's a quick start. Because, okay, we're going to give you characters. You can always use your own, and it doesn't really change anything. They're not integral to the world. They are outsiders, like Void Miners tend to be. But yeah, I agree. I see your point about like kind of taking, you know, kind of archetypal characters, and then seeing the world through their eyes, which is also not dissimilar from an RPG manual, where I think to me the especially for the class ideas, you know, those concepts really are core illustrations that help figure out a game. To a degree, games have that. Not every game does, but almost all have some version of like, what kind of thing are you? What are your group of powers can you select? You know, your playbook, right? In PBTA speak. And so yeah, I think it's interesting how here we're doing it at the level of an adventure. We're kind of trying to have our cake and eat it too, where it's both an adventure and a rule book. So we have some of that sort of, this is a class, but it's also like, okay, it's a named character that you're picking because we're just trying to get you in there as soon as possible. So yeah, it's fun to see sort of the end of it. And it would be very fun if one day this were like Star Wars, just, everyone knew your art because they all had, posters and t-shirts. Michael, your video has cut out, by the way. We can still see the art. So I think you just did this before, right? It's like a...
Yeah. I don't remember how
robots.
I fixed it last time. But if you can still see the drawing, that's the important part, right?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Yeah, and it's still... Okay, it's still live. It's still broadcasting the art.
We really out here.
Yeah. I managed to refresh it previously. I don't remember what I did, but...
Did you hit it with a comically hard, like, side palm? Oh, there you go.
There we go.
Or shake it.
Yeah. See, I am having to solve some problems as I do this because I've only drawn Heavy from this with his fists out like this, so I've never drawn the top side of them before, and now I'm having to go like, wait a second, how does that work?
Is the idea that the top side is kind of signaling like a plate with wires of a force fist? So it's because it looks like a boxing glove very much to me, but I think it's keying up that it's like a powered pneumatic far future kill you boxing glove, not a normal boxing glove.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly. It's like electrified, and I don't know, like there's not that much thought put into it, right? Because these are just, they're just characters in a like background guys in an RPG, right? But if you pressed me on it, it's like, well, okay, so like, he wanted these cybernetic augments, and so the Nostalgitron sort of fitted him with these things, and it electrifies his boxing gloves because he likes to pummel people, he likes to get his hands dirty and that sort of thing because he's a very violent guy. I envision Joe Pesci if Joe Pesci got turned into a dinosaur, like if he had been in the 1993 Super Mario Brothers movie, and got turned into a dinosaur. That's who Heavy would be. So he's like very violent, very very physically violent, and I requested these augmentations. And so what it's doing is like using his bioelectric energy that he creates and putting it into the glove. And that's basically just like an electrified metal plate on the top of the glove, but it's cool pink electricity because of the 90s, and it's got to be neon in some way. So and I've not drawn his elbows, so I don't know, like what do an Ankylosaurus's elbows look like. I would imagine very like rocky and bony.
Well, yeah, real Ankylosauruses are on the ground. They're not standing up punching you, because like punching requires a very specific build tree. But that's always the fun of the Saturday morning toy line concept of these different bodies, where ultimately they're always sort of the same. I think the way a lot of, at least for GI Joes, it was like the same chassis with like kind of a different head and sometimes different hands and like boots, and then the paint job's different, but a lot of like the basics was the same. So here, you've already gone well beyond that, but I still think it has a little bit of that continuity where like everyone is kind of a humanoid build with stuff, which is not exactly how we approached again, neither good nor bad, but different design goals. Like with the Stillfleet core rule book and the books thereafter, we were sort of approaching it as like hard SF, what would it really look like, but drawn in a way that's clearly painterly and not going for like strict realism for the most part, most of the illustrations, which gives us a little leeway, but in a different way, right, than this kind of cartoon thing. So take us through. So you're doing sort of different levels of refinement on the sketches. And set the scene again. And we're in what's called in the book Bone Snake Castle. So the play set that is kind of the sort of Castle Grayskull, like creepy
Yeah.
medieval castle, but it's the home to essentially two mobsters who've been transformed into super mutants. So it's a few different tropes, but in a way, I think that's fun that they kind of clash on purpose.
Yeah, well, I think Bone Snake ends up being the perfect place for them to hang out because it is such a confusing concept, right? Like, and we were very much making fun of the Castle Grayskull Snake Mountain aspect of He-Man, because He-Man at the end of the day is a commercial to sell toys, and Castle Grayskull does not look like it's the hero's base, right? Like Castle Grayskull, when you look at the toy, is like, it's very menacing. It's got like, the castle is literally a giant skull. It's not gray, it's actually green. Uh, but it has like fangs on it. It looks like the place that Skeletor should be hanging out because the dude is Skeletor. But for some reason, Skeletor hangs out at Snake Mountain. And I mean, like, we don't need to get into it, but there is mythology. The Snake Men, different Snake Men, not
Yeah, but
post-human Snake Men, pre-human Snake Men.
Still Snake Men. I still
Snake
think
Men.
are Snake Men. Yeah.
Yeah. They built it first, and they've been long gone because Lord Grayskull, he dealt with them, and so Skeletor is just squatting, right? Like they're just squatting on Snake Mountain. But Castle Grayskull is like this weird, confusing thing of like, okay, so there's technology inside of it. Like there's like very, very high tech, futuristic sci-fi Star Wars stuff in there. But then also it's a medieval castle. And that's just He-Man to a T. Is like, you've got Mechanic and Ram Man next to each other. And it's like, well, Mechanic for some reason is a guy who has a mechanical neck. Like he was like, hey, I augment any part of me. And they were like, yeah, we're going to give you a really long neck. And then Ram Man is
So
just
useful.
is just a dude that's good at throwing his head at stuff. And so he just wears a helmet. Like, so like very low tech versus very high tech. And then He-Man himself, it's like, is the sort of power magical or is it technological? It's all very confusing. So
he's like a Conan the Barbarian character cleaned up, but he's in a
yeah.
more science fantastic than low fantastic universe. So a little less Dying Earth, although it's funny because it has the trappings of the Dying Earth genre. But then it's not used in the same way that in those stories that there's a haunted, melancholy, capital R romantic feeling of there sort of are stakes for Elric or for anybody, right? In that kind of low fantasy world. But then He-Man, there's like no feeling because it's for little kids. So it's sort of everything resets. It feels almost closer to a sitcom in vibe. And Skeletor is like the annoying, noisy neighbor. Taylor, if you are blessedly too young to remember the end of history, when history ended that time for some people, it was a show. It was really a wild show. Yeah, the science fantasy of He-Man. I don't want to write a scholarly article about it, but man, I'm sure someone has. So I'm just going to leave it there.
Well, I am one of those people that has spent far too long thinking about the implications of certain things within He-Man, because it's one of my franchises. So yeah, I could go on and on and on and on and on forever about all sorts of things about that universe.
Yeah, but I do like to your point that there's something there's something to the idea of the trope of like vaguely bad snake people feels very kind of Jungian, universal. But then B, there's like the man who drove the snake people out of wherever, Etheria, whatever they're from. And then there's like a squatter villain, and this just seems really rad. Like saying it that way makes it sound more interesting than it really is.
Yeah.
In the same way, there's like a Skeletor self-help book that's very funny that someone wrote in the voice of Skeletor, where he's just kind of picking himself up because it's very funny, but he always loses hilariously. Like he can't do anything right. He's the world's like shittiest villain. And I think the idea that he really is good at self-help because he's lost so much, like he spends so much time in the mirror, like you're still bad, you're still of it. It feels very natural if you watch the show, then that conclusion dovetails. Like he would write these books and go on tour and like have photo shoots with Goop, and just be a very LA guy who's like very positive all the time because he got picked on. So in a way, it inverted the whole story for me. Thinking about it as he's a squatter who like he just wants some attention, really. That's all. He's not that evil. He's not a snake guy. He's just a bad guy. One of the scan leaders I read from constantly uses He-Man and Skeletor images to push very left-leaning views on every release they do. Yeah, that sounds rad. I would like to see that, Vex. If you want to share any links to cool memes with He-Man and Skeletor. Yeah, they're not. That's the thing. They're not really. They don't fill that good bad, good evil, dichotomy for me very well. Any of the Saturday morning stuff, because the stakes are so low, because they never even shoot at each other. Like in G.I. Joe, they fire warning shots above each other's heads.
Yeah.
So it doesn't even match the energy of like, little kids hitting each other with sticks, which for me, that was the norm. That was the game one played. And, there were clearly good or bad guys because it was who was hitting you with the stick or helping you hit someone else. It was that level of, and it's like they couldn't even match the simplicity of children's games. Basically, we played video games. We also played like chess, and there's winners, losers. It felt like on these shows, it was sort of nebulous. Like no one was really ever good or bad. And it's something you and I talked about. And I wanted to get away from, at least in the text as such, because I wanted the game for Enter the Nostalgitron to feel like, okay, you're still playing Stillfleet. You can play it through. It has political stakes. There's stuff to do that feels Stillfletian, even if the art is queuing up that kind of, there's no stakes. This is really all a gamble to sell you toys. But yeah, I think again, I think we found like a nice, a nice happy medium. We like when we're pushing one or the other. And yeah, Vex, let us know. Or yeah, actually, I should just check the Blister Critters channel. Sorry, long day of talking. But I know we have too many discussions for me to follow all the media recos. It'd be fun to do just like weird, I don't know, influence hour. Like people bring their favorite art and just see what everyone likes and what they look at and how they think about. I don't know, not just game design, but more broadly, their creative practice through the lens of like the stuff that they enjoy looking at and return to. Kind of like, I guess, Michael, Perfect 10. Your show kind of has that for cinema specifically, or no, maybe not cinema, right? It's just anything.
It's just pop culture, right?
Pop
yeah.
culture,
so we most often talk about movies because I think that is like the most common pop culture vernacular is TV and movies. And it's a lot easier to talk about a 2-hour movie than it is to talk about an entire television series or a specific season or what have you. But we've also done a lot of video games. We've done a couple of albums. We did Transformers, the movie, the soundtrack, as a Perfect 10. And yeah, so we just kind of cover like whatever pop culture stuff that person wants to cover. But most often we end up talking about movies.
More than meets the eye. Yeah, that's another one. That's a fun one because of the lore getting so incredibly deep. And I don't know if that happened in the comics. It certainly didn't happen in the cartoon show. But yeah, like Transformers has this sort of Jack Kirby Marvel level of like all the way back to the Big Bang. Like, it's just like it's robots all the way down. And it's really funny to me that it's almost like, which, I was at a talk the other day about astrobiology, and it is this question of like what the natural state of life in the universe is, which like most practicing astrobiologists think there's lots of life, but it's all just like bacterial mats floating on like sub-Neptunes, it's like just ooze. And like we're the weird because we became complex after, a billion years of random experiments. And now we're about to like nuke ourselves back to just being ooze and kind of go back to like the normal baseline thing that life does. But it's completely possible. It's not plausible, but it's possible that the baseline of life is to create civilizations that engineer themselves out of existence with self-replicating robots. And then those robots form two perfect factions, one to destroy and one to form cars, because cars are cool, which is the symmetric antithesis of destruction. So I don't know how, whoever came up with that, it's like a really weird, it's like seeing Fast and the Furious, like, way ahead of time. But the way that Transformers mythology is like both some sort of Manichaean like Christian type thing, but also about AI, but also just like cars are cool. And that's bam, you've got like you've got a whole history of the universe, you've got a whole alternate way that life probably could be, and humans become very incidental. So I loved it because it has that sort of that little like Lovecraftian pearl there that like, yeah, humans, who cares about humans? Let's talk about a universe filled with robots shooting each other with lasers from their wrists and turning into cars, and sometimes Tyrannosauruses.
Yeah, the thing about Saturday morning cartoons, and I think the reason why I get so infinitely fascinated with them is that you had people who were being hired to create stories out of chunks of plastic, right? And some of it made a lot of sense. Like I think with Ninja Turtles, there's a lot more going in because you've got the comic book originally, and then the toys based off the comic, and then the show based off of the toys, right? So you're still getting there. You're still getting to the point of like the cartoon show doesn't make a ton of sense because there's a lot of decisions being made there that are just to, like sell the Technodrome or Krang. And it's like, so sometimes he's in this suit and sometimes he's in this little walker thing. And sometimes the suit gets really big. And also they have a blimp with their name on the side of it. So like the logo that we see at the beginning of the cartoon is diegetic. Like who designed that? Did Donatello design that? Because he presumably built the blimp. And like, but how did he build the blimp? Where did he get that stuff? And so like you really, you can't think about it too much, but also it's a lot of fun to think about it too much. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about these things too much, but I love the aspect of it with Transformers, Ninja Turtles, GI Joe, He-Man, where these people are just like, they've just been hired and they are tasked, and it's not their thing, it doesn't belong to them, right? Like Eastman and Laird created the Turtles, but the people who came along and wrote the cartoon show, obviously Eastman and Laird were involved, but they kind of did their own thing and they took it in its own direction. And then even the Archie comics version of the Ninja Turtles, where they go into outer space and they fight in the Galactic Wrestling Federation, and they all have, like, they have these WWF style costumes and they're traveling around space in a giant talking cow head, like it, which has nothing to do with anything from the comics, right? Like, or the cartoon show. It's just purely its own thing because somebody was just given the task of write a bunch of Ninja Turtle stuff, and they were like, well, I like wrestling and I like outer space, so I'm going to take the Ninja Turtles into outer space. And then you end up with like these complex mythologies, and then 30-40 years later somebody makes a movie and that movie references that one weird thing that nobody ever talks about. Transformers 1 is a really great example of this, because Transformers 1 is a very, like, for people who haven't seen it, the marketing was terrible. It made it look like it was just like a comedy Transformers movie. It's not. Like, it is the most authentically like self-serious hard sci-fi Transformers movie to date. Now, it is not a hard sci-fi movie, but for Transformers it definitely is. Like, there's a lot going on in that movie that is drawing from, as you referenced, the Marvel comics that really pushed the Transformers and gave them this whole mythology and Cybertron and all of this stuff that's never on screen, right? But people were just, given the keys to these franchises because no one was paying attention, and they went, well, kids like it, so I've got a captive audience, I'm gonna just write something rad. Sonic the Hedgehog is also a great example. The Sonic the Hedgehog comics, which were the first comics that I collected, I think they've come up on the previous 2 live streams as well. The stories that were in those comics were like hardcore comic book stories that had nothing to do with the video games. They had nothing to do with really anything. They were just like, well, we're here. If I got to do this, I might as well do a thing that I'm proud of. And I love that. I love that aspect of this part of pop culture.
Yeah. I mean, I have no interest in pop culture as such, but I like when these things work despite their genre assumptions that don't make any sense, and there's the nostalgia part of this project is unpacking nostalgia, which I generally am very suspicious of. I view as kind of a bad emotion to conjure, but there are things like I did like He-Man growing up, so it's like cool to me that we got to do a thing that mobilizes parts of it I like. But I like that the Turtles work. Like, I think the Ninja Turtles are awesome and fun to watch all of the things related to them, even though they make no sense. And to your point, they've kind of been, resurrected and puppeted. They're sort of a zombie IP from before the sort of infinite sprawl of Star Wars and Marvel. Like there was tons, like you're saying, there's Turtles stuff the Ninja Turtles have done everything and been everywhere to sell Coca-Cola or whatever, right? And they're still fun, and they still are, interesting, like the constant comparison of superheroes to Greek gods or whatever. That's like, we know they're not real. but they allow us to tell certain kinds of stories. They simplify certain kinds of stories. It makes sense that, it makes just as much sense to say Poseidon's a big guy who can throw tridents, and also Zeus sometimes turns into a mist or a duck and impregnates a woman or whatever, as it does to say the Ninja Turtles are teenage mutants from New York, New Jersey, who are also into ninjutsu, and mostly though just want to eat pizza and skateboard, which are all like, I guess that was supposed to cue up teen, but to me, it, like, as a teen who didn't skateboard, and like I grew up in Atlanta, so pizza was not a major, it was like, it just felt like random, it just felt as random as anything else. But I will say, to go back to Transformers, that one's interesting because it's the doubling down on the single novum. It's like, it does get weird, but it's always weird about guys who turn into cars, like robots who turn into cars, being like, it's like that obsession with like, okay, yeah, but what about robots turning into cars driving really fast? And it feels, it's so funny to me to sort of think about, you could divide all of pop culture, all these IP franchises, into these two, like one where you're just trying to sell stuff, and so it's infinitely protean, it never really settles on anything. It's just like, oh, no, I'm a Ninja Turtle, but I sure do love Red Lobster cheddar cheese biscuits. And then the other one where it's like, they always come back to their thing. And I think certain shows were that sort of served certain franchises better or worse in my head. Not that I really want to rewatch all these things, but like, I feel like I couldn't really, rate them without watching at least a couple episodes.
Of all of the ones that we've mentioned, so Turtles, G.I. Joe, Transformers, He-Man, Transformers holds up the best. There is some really, really good stuff in there. The one that we didn't mention that really holds up the best is Ghostbusters, because J. Michael Straczynski was one of the main writers on that. So there's some really, really great episodes of Ghostbusters that are just great television. Like the fact that it's a cartoon show for kids was not important to them. It was like, they were like, oh, we've got this great premise, we can explore anything. So I don't know, it's Christmas. For some reason they get transported back in time, and they capture the ghosts of spirit, the ghosts of past, present, and future, or whatever, right? And so then they have to take over, and they have to take Scrooge through his thing, and it's like, there's no real logic to why that happens, other than like, well, it was Christmas, so like, Christmas made it happen. And it's funny that the Ghostbusters caught the ghosts in A Christmas Carol, so like, just let it go. But then within that episode, there's some really, really great stuff. There's some actual character moments. The episode with the boogeyman, where like, we get in the Ghostbusters cartoon a real legitimate explanation for why Egon Spengler became a Ghostbuster, like why the Ghostbusters happened, because without Egon having an experience with the boogeyman that he, as an adult thinks is fake, but then in the course of this episode discovers the boogeyman's real, and that actually happened to you. And it's like, when that was the impetus for him studying the paranormal, which led him down the path to meeting Ray, and then them creating the Ghostbusters, right? Like, there's really, really good stuff in there. It's really funny to me how some of that stuff actually does hold up. Ninja Turtles does not. Like, Ninja Turtles is still fun, it's still full of great ideas, but Raph, the cool but rude one, or cool but crude, depending on what side of the fence you land on with that argument, but he mugs at the camera every 15 seconds. Anything that happens, Raph turns to the camera, he breaks the fourth wall, and oftentimes we'll make jokes at the audience of like, and they say we're slimy, right? And it's like, who are you talking to, Raph? And like, it just, but it's not the writers were aware that he was doing it, but the show itself isn't self-aware that it's breaking the fourth wall, like Deadpool, right? Like, it's just, they were just like, this is a funny joke, and then you watch it as an adult and you're like, it's really not, it's not a funny joke. But as a kid, you're just being cued to believe that it's funny, sort of thing. But
I mean, it's like they were trying to go for What We Do in the Shadows, which is maybe my favorite like funny show. But I mean, that works because it is still in the same vein as the original, the British Office trope of like, a camera team is following around unlikely, like not Bravo celebrity, reality people. And okay, in this show, they're, vampires. But it's like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for everyone else is very real, and for Raphael is a show where they're teenagers from New York or New Jersey, maybe Connecticut, who have been transformed into mutant turtles. No, they're mutant turtles who've been transformed into teenagers, right? The mutant turtles gain sapience. They're kind of like teens. They're roughly at the level of complexity of thought of like a 16-year-old from the outer boroughs. But they also are master ninjas.
Yeah.
And then they have many other, like on top of that, are pieces of flair of kind of lore. And so these characters are now the subject of like a documentary, but it's like no one else is in on it but him, which always, it's like, okay, well, he's a narcissist, right? Like he's like imagining a show about him.
Yeah.
Although now that I say that, I mean, this would be the number one show in America. Like if there were just 4 teens randomly turned into Mutant Ninja Turtles, who would not watch that? I mean, it would displace every other cultural event whenever it came on, even if they were doing the dumbest possible shit, which, then as you're saying, they pretty much proceed to do. So yeah, I think the power of nostalgia, I mean, I think the danger of nostalgia is also its source of power, right? That it's a feeling that, like all feelings, it's not tied to fact. Like you can have nostalgia for things that are pretty objectively terrible. And you can have nostalgia for things that really hold up. And I think, to me, like Aeon Flux holds up really well. Ghostbusters, the cartoon and the movies do hold up. And I actually think some of the new movies are good too. I mean, I think there's a lot of these franchises that I don't mind as much as as a lot of like sort of zombified IP. Maybe because the originals were they were so patently like silly. But yeah, if you get a good team of writers, you can bring any story to life. And I do agree, as Vex is saying, the chat is hard not to love. Being turned into teens is fucked. It's like the worst mutation you can accidentally. Oh no, I'm a 16-year-old. Whether you were old before or you were younger, either way, you're like getting thrown into the worst situation in some ways. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the teens being turned into turtles is how I narrated it. Vex is also bringing this up, and Taylor, that it makes sense in my mind, but it's not what happened, right? In the show, they were little turtles, and they became teens. So that's actually maybe the weirdest novum. This is the thing about science fiction studies. When you really break it down, it's like a branch of structuralism, right? It's like these shows depend on multiple kinds of assumptions about things that aren't real. So Transformers is actually much simpler. Everything is cars, or everything is, extremely sophisticated robots who are self-aware, but also cars. That's it. That's the novum. Of course, if you have a civilization, a planet, a Earth-sized series of robots who are extremely intelligent, they can go through the stars. They can do all kinds of stuff. You don't need anything else. With Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, we just covered so much ground. You can mutate things into other things. Okay, that's already kind of getting into this, like, it's kind of Frankenstein with post-World War II, like atomic scare thing, but also species into other species, but still in their juvenile form. But they take on the cultural trappings. Like they don't just become turtles. They're not just like, blah, 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 blah. They're like specifically like cool teens from the East Coast of the United States, right? Like they're, you know what I mean? So it's like, there's so much there. And then they also are trained at the same time that they're becoming human teens to be ninja, which is just like, okay, but ninja are, so there's so many like levels that just get weirder and weirder. They know ninjutsu because Splinter taught them, but did they ever explain why Splinter knows it? Splinter is actually a ninja, right? Splinter
okay, so in the
Shredder are ninja.
In the cartoon series, Splinter is Hamato Yoshi, who is a man from Japan that because of his close contact with rats, because he comes to America but with nothing because he was dishonored because Shredder betrayed him. So he's living in the sewers with the rats, and because he's been in close contact with the rats, when he touches the mutagen that the turtles are covered in, it mutates him into a rat. In almost all other incarnations, Splinter is a rat who is mutated into Splinter in the same fashion that the turtles are. Now,
got it.
In the movies, and I believe in the original comic book, I'd have to crack open the original comic book to double check, but I believe the movies are pretty faithful to the comic. He was Hamato Yoshi's pet. And so that's why he knows ninjutsu, because he studied, like he watched his master perform all of the like the katas and stuff like that. And so then he was able to replicate them once he was mutated, because rats are very smart, right? Like because presumably, right, if your pet rat could also be a human, then there you go. Yeah, are we not talking about art? We are talking about art.
We are talking about art. I was just nudging, especially Vex and Taylor,
Yeah.
since we have like 10 minutes left in this series, and we'll have to just have you back, Michael. But
Yeah.
this is a good chance to ask about famous IP related things. But of course, we can just keep talking. It is funny because you do know all this stuff, and in my head, I'm like, I know that, but then it's because I also at some point I think knew at least the last thing you said, which I'm like, why did I know that? Why is this strike? Why was this part of my obsession with Japan? It's not even about real Japan. It has no connection. It's not organically about anything. But as a kid, it felt sort of, if this makes sense, on the same playing field, it felt as important as, Seven Samurai. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't worse or better. It was like, you're a little kid. You watch, you're like, that's awesome. You watch the other thing, you're like, that's awesome. Now as an adult, I'm like, yeah, one holds up better than the other.
Yeah, for sure.
So it is interesting. They are art. They are art, aren't they? Okay. Does that imply the turtles learned their teen affectations by observing New York teens? I think it is this. So this gets to sort of a D&D Sword and Sorcery-esque concept, which is sympathetic magic. It's like by being close to something, by proximity, you can become a version of that thing, or you know what I mean? It's like it kind of works, I think, despite the fact it isn't very science fictional, and this is meant to be more a science fiction show than a fantasy show, because it's still in our brains. And I think that's how human brains work, is we do pattern recognition, and we're bad at like figuring out causality separate from correlation. Like, we just want correlation to make sense as causal. So it's like, yeah, of course, if I hang out around rats long enough, ... I will become a giant rat. Or if a rat hangs out around a warrior, then a rat will become and it's like, oh, that makes total sense. Now I get it. Part of your brain like wants that to be true, I think. So again, I don't know. It's interesting how the design of these kind of mutant characters gets at these deep ideas about like who we are and who we wish we were. I don't know why so many of us are just like, if only I was a huge talking rat, or like, if only I was a car, my life would be so much better. I just drive around space shooting lasers. So Michael, any thoughts as you're, in terms of the illustration here, it's looking badass. You got sort of what are they called? Spandrels? What is the things? Spandrels maybe. What's the term? It'll come to me. The leg parts, the shin parts of armor. Anyway, some cool leg armor.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know armor.
I used to know these words too.
Yeah.
And the figure's coming online. And also, can we clarify canonically for the viewers, is Heavy holding like, it's like a Game Boy, right? He's playing a game.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this would be a non-specific video game handheld, but yeah, it's a Game Boy. Yeah.
It's a Playboy, or I guess Playboy is something else, but yeah, it's a. Yeah.
Whenever I need to put a non-copyrighted version of a Nintendo handheld console into something, I always refer to it as a Pretendo Game Bro, and that's how I get around it, and it's satire at that point. Then we're in fair use. It's all good.
No, I like Pretendo is really fun too, because it sounds right. There's nothing wrong with that construction. So we're getting the sense of what they do in their off time. So I think this is part of the joke too, and I think it is a hall of mirrors with what level you play these games. And we've thought about it so much because we're looking at proofing the book, right? Going again and again through the same pages, thinking about the flow, trying to make it good and fun for a wide audience. But it's like, what do these bad guys do in their downtime? Like, how did they get to this point? They were like kind of early modern space marines who then elected to become super mutant soldiers for like a minor fascist official on a distant island in a distant world. But most of the time they just get to hang out in a castle, but it's not a real castle. It's like a simulated castle. And it makes sense that they would do things like play handheld video games, right? It's like, it's kind of like, I'm imagining like special operators for the United States military, like in some foreign land, heavy quotation marks. But yeah, they're like sitting around playing video games, right? Like a lot of the time, effectively.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's kind of like the perfect analog to it, right? These guys are co-soldiers, right? Like they're and specifically these two are the guys that you send out because this is like a low risk thing, and we just want to, we're just sending them out to basically get a document signed. But if something goes wrong, they can handle themselves. And they get there, and Ubun is like, if you stay here, you can eat junk food and play video games all day. And they're like, oh, that's so much better than what the co has us doing. They don't have any like stake in it. They don't care about Ubun's goals. He has just given them an enticing offer. Like that is all it is to them. Right?
But I think more than just being lazy, because I think they could be operators for the company at a low level for low pay or really low recognition somewhere, going from world to world in the world of, the canon of Stillfleet. But I think they go work for this sort of serpent-born, demi snake super villain, because he promotes them to like his right hand guys, right? It's sort of like they're doing it not as much for anything else than just nearness to power and then the feeling of like being rewarded, being patted on the head. So sort of why does anyone become sort of a capo for the the pigs, right? It's because it's a feeling thing. And yeah, I think probably they're still kind of the same lazy soldiers who are like, yeah, I guess I'll just sit around all day until like I'm called up to do something. They're not from here. They don't know anyone. And they've been transformed into extremely powerful fighters, but also because it's a cartoon version, they're like no longer human, but they're kind of N of one like creatures. So they have a sort of loneliness, I think, to all ththese. It's the same as Skeletor, really, at the end of the day. It's a guy talking in the mirror who keeps getting beaten up by the quote unquote good guys. But he's just such a dick. But he's kind of the most interesting one in the show. Vex is pointing out, if my situation were bad enough, I would become a fascist to hang out in a castle and play video games all day. And I think that is one of the, all these stories. It's like, it's kind of like the myths. The characters in myths aren't good or bad. They're just sort of stand-ins for like types of reactions to situations. There's that fate kind of idea that does feel very real. I don't believe in fate, but I mean, it's in those old stories, and it's sort of, it is interesting how in games it can often feel more fun to lean into the sort of fated aspect of like, well, my character, my PC is just going to die, right? I'm going to like Leroy Jenkins, like, and end this character, and it'll be more fun and it'll be funny. And it's not something you do in real life, but it's kind of cathartic because, it's just a game. It's a story. So I think it'll be fun, hopefully, for people to meet Disco and Heavy, the number 2 and 3 villains, basically, and eventually meet Ubun, the Ripper, whom we already saw, the number 1 villain in the story, and have some sharp words, doing some leg adjustments. Vex is pointing out, their new game Trials has this kind of mytho-poetic level of you're being supplicants to a god is deciding what's going to happen, and it's fun to kind of live through that really fate driven structural kind of story, especially let's take a little shorty kind of adventure. So a little different, although analogous maybe to taking a game like Stillfleet, intended for the replayable, realistic-ish, very far future, but realistic within certain constraints, sci-fi, and boiling it down to like, let's play one weird game where it feels cartoony. So Michael, thanks for sort of accompanying on this journey. Do you want to shift back to the art and say some words about some of the details you're adding? I see you're doing a couple techniques here, like adding little dots.
So I'm just giving him scales, right? And that just is, I mean, it's just to communicate that he's all bony and rough and all of that sort of thing. But yeah, it's also just like, because it's cartoons, we can just draw like a couple, and then that just implies the existence of all of them, which is the fun part about doing cartoon stuff, is that you're just like, I get to cheat on a lot of things, because it's a convention of the genre. Shorthand, a lot of shortcuts in shorthand. So yeah, but it also it gives me the ability to add some dimension to it. Like I'm looking at it now and I'm saying this one actually should be more like flat, to give the impression that it's that there's like a curve there, right? So you can also use it to add a little bit more to the shape.
Yeah, I like the idea that they're scales, which makes total sense. Because in my mind they're like buboes, like ridged, they're like outcroppings of flesh, warty things that still do the
Yeah.
same, do what you're describing, and they give, to your point, they add a lot of depth. As soon as you started adding them, to me the figure felt round. That was a kind of word. I was like, oh yeah, this guy
Yeah.
feels like heavy, like his name's heavy. But I also, yeah, I get what you're saying, but you only have to do a couple and the mind fills in, or like has a sense of texture when there wasn't before. It was just smooth or indiscernible. Now it's like, oh, it's
Yeah.
definitely like kind of rough.
Yeah.
Taylor, by the way, says, I like your line weight, very toonish.
Yeah, well, and this isn't even final, right? Because this is my sketch layer. So I'll go over this and I'll ink it with the smoother brush for that, and I'll do it in black, and I'll add more of like the comic booky sort of, like, you can see like it'll get even more comic book when I do that stuff, right? With a little bit more of like that inked look, because this right now is more of a pencil layer, but which I could probably skip some of and just go straight to that, but I don't know, this is a bit of an iterative process sometimes of like a little bit, add more detail as you go. Take some detail away probably even as I'm doing that ink layer. I'll
Yeah.
make the final calls on like how much really needs to be in this,
If the
for it to
lines
read a small
thicken,
size.
yeah, they're gonna be a little less detailed, but that can be, again, depending what you're going for. Taylor did have a follow-up question. Do you play with your drawing tools much, or do you stick with your faves?
So for a project like this, and this is again my graphic design tendencies coming through, I want it to be as consistent as possible throughout the book. I want it to look like I did it all at once and not over the course of several months, which is a little bit of a trick. So I'm using the same brushes. I'm using the same techniques. There has been a bit of a progression. So the earlier illustrations I'm doing certain things, and then in later ones I'm doing things a little bit differently. So there is I don't know if people will really be able to tell, or if it's just something that I know in the back of my head, and in the background, but I'm trying to be as consistent as possible. So I've been using the same techniques and the same style throughout in order to keep it consistent. But I try out different stuff all the time, and there are a few pieces of art within the book that are different. So like when we get down to the figures here, so Asimov's the first one that I did. So these are what the minis will look like, and I did these a little bit different because I wanted them to look plastic. I didn't want them to look like organic materials. I wanted them to look very much like they were plastic versions, and obviously like with all the joints and everything, because these are the action figures from the cartoon show, and that's when you get the minis. That's what you're getting is the minis are a representation. If we could have made action figures, we would have, but but that's obviously a lot more expensive. But yeah, that was the idea here. So you can see like with my highlights, they've got more of like a bubble aspect to them, and the idea there is to give it just a little bit more of that sheen. And then the other thing that I did is these are like perfectly symmetrical. Now the designs are asymmetric, so there are some elements that aren't part of that symmetry, but Procreate has an awesome ability to, you can see that line down the middle of the canvas. So you can turn on drawing assist, and literally as you draw on one side, it mirrors it on the other side. So for all of these miniatures, that's what I did. They are all like this perfect mirrored thing, but then have some fun with it where like his tail is obviously off to one side, and there are some little differences, but yeah, so that's really the only like place where I'd say I went outside of the style and did something very different. But even then, like I'm using the same brushes, I'm using the same blending techniques and that sort of thing. It's just, I just wanted to push the I don't know, I guess just sort of like that in-world aspect of it a little bit more with those, and make them look a little bit more like toys.
The faux texture, the plastic really pops, and it's nice. It's fun, because when you say that to me, they look like they've been plasticized in like a Photoshop filter. But I
Yes,
think
yeah.
maybe you're adding like just white strokes in the right places to make it look like the kind of reflection of the plastic.
Yeah.
And definitely the
Except for
toes.
Screwth, because Screwth is different, and so he is a plush. I made Screwth stuffed because that made more sense to me. There wouldn't be a Screwth action figure like his show
Right.
would have.
It's a different show. It's a spin-off.
Yeah, it's
so
a
that makes
spin-off.
sense,
And I almost put the suckers on his hands so that you could stick them to your back window.
Oh, yeah.
I opted against that and just left them as a plush, very much in the style of the this is a totally random poll, but the DuckTales video game, the one-ups are little Scrooge McDuck plushes, and they're because it's an 8-bit game, they're perfectly symmetrical, right? And so I looked at that, I referenced that when I was doing this one, because I was like, that's what I wanted to feel like is that plush.
Well, I also love that he's like, the plush is cuter and it's a little bit slimmer, and the actual Scrooth is a little more like an impossible, like
yeah,
I don't know, like it's like Danny DeVito, but like just like blown up to like, a sphere with like a cat head with a bunch of arms, and it's a little more like grimy. And so I think that's, again, that makes sense, because the toy is meant to sell the character in a lovable way, and the actual being is not even an alien. It's not something that arose organically. Again, like, it is from this planet by accident. It is a 3D printing error from a very advanced spaceship. So it is like they were trying to do something else, and they made this like weird like asymmetric cat thing. Final question from Vex.
Yes.
And again, we'll have you back on, so nothing's ever final, Michael. We're friends. But for this series, Vex has asked, do you ever do anything to practice composition specifically?
I do. A lot of what I draw is just characters. Like, I do a lot more character design than anything else. The big challenge with this book was making sure that I actually did some environmental stuff. And so I've done more on this project to push that stuff than anything that I've done probably in the last like 10 years, because mostly I've just been drawing for myself. But because this is a certain type of product, I wanted to make sure that I was hitting all of those things. And so there is a certain aspect of it, but the other part is that with the book, I've done things in components, right? So you can see on here, I've got all of the villagers, all of our NPCs for the island of Domawal, but then I have like the actual environment in its own illustration. But this is one where, like, when I did it, I was thinking about the layout of the book and where this is going to appear in the book, as well as like future uses for it, of like if we wanted to do like a print or something like that at some point, or bring this back for something else, to be able to like put those characters basically on here almost like a sticker sheet, like those old like activity sticker sheet sort of thing. And so when I decided exactly what the layout of this was going to be, that's what I was working towards. So in terms of composition here, it's like rule of thirds is always going to be the easiest thing to go to, right? Like that's kind of the standard. And if you look at where the gate is at the end of that road, it's not quite, because you don't want to be like exact, because if you're exact, then it's sort of like, it's almost like uncanny valley sort of thing, right? Like if you're too precise with these things, but I wanted to frame this in a cinematic way. And so rather than, because again, I'm using the Procreate tools, and the Procreate software has the ability to set a vanishing point, and then it gives you the ability to turn the assist on and off. And so all of these lines are like in perfect perspective, not because I'm such a great artist, but because the tool is helping me get there. I am not usually this good unless I pull out a ruler and do it that way, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with, and a lot of people do. But I did want this to have like that very like cinematic movie sort of framing to it, and so that's where I go to the rule of thirds. I did this in a landscape as opposed to doing it square or or in a different aspect ratio, because I wanted it to have that. It's not in a specific aspect ratio, but it is wider than it is tall. So that allowed me to kind of keep it in there. And as it appears in the book, is actually even thinner. Like it's not even this tall. You don't see the whole illustration in the book, which is there's an interesting component to that of like we got to use these in some other way, put out some other stuff so that people can see like the full illustrations, because some of them are like very cut off. But by design, like that was the purpose.
Well, and that's one of the problems with any of this stuff, right? It applies to writing as well, which is you write more than you end up putting in. You have to cut, you draw more than you can show, because of the limitations of print, but also in a way the limitations of the cognitive burden of the reader, the player, the GM. And I do think in that way, cinema is a really good analog to games, because, in cinema, you're creating so much. And then what is ultimately shot is a tiny piece of that. You're creating whole world, stages, costumes, characters. And then a Squeebdorb comes on and says 3 lines. Everyone laughs. Squeebdorb leaves. You never see Squeebdorb again. But somebody wrote, the showrunner had some junior writer write like a book length, basically wrote a novel about Squeebdorp, and, lost his aunt at a young age who'd raised him, and he was floating around in the Giltdorp sector. And, so it's like all these bits. And I think it's fun to see how some of these influences come together for this book, where, again, for me, it was like magic, where, we wrote it, but then you're very fast with, and base layout, it was already looking really good, but the illustrations came together very quickly. So for me, it's just like, oh crap, you drew a lot of stuff really quickly. But I agree, there's something really nice and cinematic. I felt like that when you showed me that background, it's like, oh, this is perfect. It cues up the kind of idea of a frontier and strangers coming to town from like a Western, but it's not it's not a Western. It has as much to do with like, the genre of, serial commercials, bad serial commercials, as it does with like High Noon. But to be able to sort of throw that in, even if it's more subtle because it's a background image, it's really lovely. I appreciate you sharing not just the art, but also your thoughts behind the art and the design with all of us. So it's past 9. I think we're going to wrap it up. But again, we can have Michael back on if you want to see Michael, I don't know, say things on Discord that are nice. Say things on Twitter, Blue Sky. Follow Michael at Arkangel Wulf Design and Illustration. It's Arkangel Wulf on the social medias, especially Instagram, I imagine, Blue Sky.
Yes. Yeah.
And thanks as ever. Not just Vex. I'm sorry, I think the other night I said, but Vex and Taylor. Taylor, thank you as well for joining a lot of these conversations and having great questions and thoughts. And Vex for teaching us all a lot more about anime and manga that I didn't know. I think we're probably going to kind of call it a wrap. But Michael, it's been great having you on. Definitely want to give you the last word here. So tonight we looked at mostly, heavy, but generally sort of some bad guys in C2 in this isometric environment. You then showed us some other things, these backgrounds. We're looking at beautiful pizza box, which has, of course, mechanics. Of course, there's a random table. It's an SR game. Everything has a random table that does something. So find out when you meet the pizza. Any last words, anything you wanted to add, any last advice, or just reflections on doing a whole game book? I believe your first whole game book of art.
Yeah. I mean, this is really the first whole anything of my art that I've put out there in this way, other than just making prints and doing sketches for people and stuff. So it's been we're so close to the end. Like I said, we're doing like odds and ends, and that's why I brought up this pizza, because this is one of those things of like, this is another inset illustration that's in the book. It's just a little thing of like, it wasn't there for the longest time. It was just a placeholder. Now it's in the book, and I sent you a little like screen grab of it in the book to just be like, man, it really looks like something now. And that is it's been really cool. The whole process of writing it with you, and then starting with the character designs, and then doing layout, and now finalizing it with these last few illustrations, and really getting it nailed down like so soon. We're so close to the finish line. The whole process has been awesome, and it's like addictive. I have other stuff that I need to work on too. I got a big show this weekend that I got to get some stuff done for. Big retro gaming expo here in Vancouver. that I'll be at, that I'll have a table at, and I've got a whole bunch of stuff that I got to do for it. But I spent my whole day today drawing an ice cave slurp beast, and there's nothing better in life than doing that, than drawing these silly things. So yeah, this has been an awesome project to work on, and I'm excited for whatever stupid stuff we come up with next, because stupid stuff is where I live. So but it's people also enjoying it out in the world has been like the best part, because normally I'm just sitting in my office by myself going like, be really cool if I drew Sonic with a chili dog with the food flying out of his mouth. And then some people are like, I also think that would be really cool. And I go, oh, it's very validating, right? That I'm not alone in these things.
And now you're married and you have beautiful kids, and that's the circle of life, is finding the person who wants to also see you draw Sonic the Hedgehog with chili cheese dogs flying out of his mouth.
Yeah.
Well, in my case, pretty obsessed with pizza, so really appreciated that you have pizza in there. We also have canonical giant New Jersey sandwiches, which do things as well. So if you're interested in sort of junk food, you gotta check out Enter the Nostalgitron by Michael J. Cohen and myself. All art and design by Michael J. Cohen. And we're gonna get back to some other non-cartoony products, but we also have a whole cartoon animal game. So who knows, Michael? We gotta get together, keep working on this stuff. For now, we're gonna sign off. We're gonna send out these PDFs as soon as we can, and keep the party going. Thanks again, everyone in the chat, and we'll be back soon very soon, actually, with more Why We Roll in the near future. Until then, goodbye, internet. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.